Imagine waking up in rural India village early in the morning. A woman walks into her kitchen. For generations, she cooked using firewood or cow dung on a traditional mud made system. The smoke fills the room, the air is thick, her eyes burns, her lungs slowly suffer. Now imagine the same kitchen today. Instead of smoke, there is a small blue flame from the LPG cylinder, cleaner, faster, and healthier. These transition from smoky system to clean LPG gas is one of the biggest social transformations India has attempted in the last decade. But here is the strange part. Millions of households now own LPG connections. That is good. Yet many of them don't actually use them regularly. And that's the paradox. And is what economists call India's LPG conundrum. Back in 2016, the Indian government launched one of the largest clean energy welfare programs in the world. The program was called Pradhan Mantri Ujjwala Yojana. The goal was simple: give poor households free LPG connections so they can stop cooking with firewood and other polluting fuels. And the scale was massive. Within few years, tens of millions of LPG connections were distributed to low income families. The logic was powerful. Cooking with biomass fuels like wood or dung causes indoor air pollution. And the indoor pollution kills hundreds of thousands of Indians every year. So the government believed that subsidizing LPG could improve public health, empower women, and modernize rural kitchens. On paper, the program looked like huge success. India's LPG connections coverage shot up dramatically. But then the researchers started looking at something deeper, not connections, actual utilization levels. And that's where the things got complicated. So when economists studied LPG usage in the rural households, they noticed something unexpected. Yes, the families had gas cylinders, but many still continued using firewood. Why? Because the LPG refills were expensive. And studies showed that many beneficiaries purchased far fewer cylinders per year than needed for daily cooking. In fact, in some regions, only a small fraction of households bought enough cylinders to meet even half their cooking needs. Instead, families adopted a hybrid approach. Gas for quick meals, firewood for everything else. This phenomena even has a name. Energy economists call it fuel stacking. Instead of switching fully to cleaner fuels, households combine multiple fuels to manage cost. And that is the heart of India's LPG puzzle. The government solved the access problem, but affordability still remains. To solve the affordability issue, the government introduced subsidies. Under the current system, many poor households receive around 50 to 300 rupees subsidy per LPG per cylinder for a limited number of refills every year. That means the government pays part of the cost so families can afford the gas. But subsidies create another challenge: physical pressure. India imports large portion of its LPG supplies. In fact, more than half of India LPG consumption depends on imports. So when global energy prices rise, the cost of LPG shoots up. And someone has to absorb that cost, right? Either consumers pay more or the government increases subsidies, which means the taxpayer eventually pays. This becomes a balancing act between social welfare and physical discipline. But the story doesn't stop with subsidies. There is another layer in the system. India's three major oil marketing companies: Indian Oil, Bharat Petroleum, and Hindustan Petroleum. These companies sell LPG cylinders domestically, but sometimes they sell them below their actual cost. This creates something called under recoveries. In simple terms, they lose money on every cylinder sold. The government compensates them later, but not always fully. For example, recent estimates suggested oil companies faced hundreds of billion-dollar rupees in under recoveries on domestic LPG sales. So the LPG subsidy system isn't just a welfare program. It is also a complex financial ecosystem involving government budgets, global energy prices, oil marketing companies, and consumers. And when one of these factors changes, the entire system gets stressed. This puts policymakers in a difficult position. If LPG prices rises too much, poor households stop refilling cylinders. But if subsidies raise too much, the government budget gets stretched. So the government has tried several strategies. For example, encouraging welfare households to voluntarily give up LPG subsidies so that the benefit can be passed or redirected to poorer families. Millions of households actually did surrender their subsidy, but even that didn't fully solve the problem because the underlying issue remains, right? Energy affordability. Now add one more layer to this puzzle: global geopolitics. LPG prices are closely linked to international oil markets. The crude oil prices rise because of war, supply chain disruptions, global demand shocks. India feels the impact almost immediately. And that's why LPG prices in India sometimes move sharply. Even small price increase can significantly affect the rural household. Because when your monthly income is limited, even few hundred rupees matters, right? And in many rural households, LPG isn't the only option. Right? Firewood still easily available. Crop residue is free. So from purely economic perspective, firewood costs time, but LPG costs money. And for many families, money is the bigger constraint. That's why even today, many households with LPG cylinders continue using traditional fuels alongside gas. The connection exists, right? But the transaction isn't complete. Today, policymakers are debating the next phase of India's clean energy cooking transition. Some experts suggest expanding subsidies further. Others argue that subsidies should become more targeted. And the third group believes the future might be beyond LPG together. For example, electric cooking or piped natural gas. Because electricity prices in some cities can compare with LPG cost depending on efficiency and tariffs. If electric cooking becomes widespread, it could even reduce India's dependence on imported LPG. But the transaction would require reliable electricity, new appliances, and infrastructure upgrades, which takes time, right? Even today, the LPG system continues evolving. Recent policies have included limits on number of subsidized refills, mandatory identity verification to prevent subsidy leakages, changes in refill rules in some regions to manage supply pressure. These policies are designed to ensure the subsidies reach the right households while controlling misuse. But they also highlight something important. India's LPG story is still being written. And this story teaches us something deeper about economics. Sometimes solving a problem isn't about building infrastructure or distributing assets. It's about making sure people can actually afford to use them. India successfully delivered millions of LPG connections, but ensuring sustained usage is a much harder challenge because it depends on income levels, energy prices, and behavioral habits. In other words, access is step one, affordability is step two, and long term adoption is step three. So, the next time you see a blue LPG flame in an Indian kitchen, remember behind that simple flame lies a massive system, a system involving government policy, global energy markets, welfare economics, and household decision making. India's LPG resolution is real, but the conundrum remains. Can India make clean cooking truly affordable for everyone? Because if LPG becomes too expensive, households may go back to firewood. And if subsidies become too large, the government finances get stretched. So, policymakers are walking a tightrope, balancing public health, energy security, and economic sustainability. And that brings me a question for you. Do you think LPG should continue to be heavily subsidized in India, or should the country start transitioning towards alternatives like electric cooking or piped gas? I'm genuinely curious to hear your thoughts. Drop your views in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoy deep dives into economics, business, and hidden systems shaping India's future, consider subscribing to the channel. Because every week I break down complex stories like this so you can understand how the economy really works. I'll see you in the next one.